Hey, everybody. Welcome to Odd and Untold, the podcast where we talk about all things strange and spooky. And this week, I'm going to be going down to the South American continent. We're going to be talking about some Bigfoot and hairy humanoid type creatures in South America. Normally, when people think of Bigfoot, you're thinking of North America, the United States and Canada, Pacific Northwest, the Canadian, Western territories. So most people don't really think of hairy humanoids, hairy primates in South America. Other places in the world have them. I mentioned a week or so ago the Yowie in Australia. You have the Yeren in China. You have the Almasty in like Russia, the orang pendek. So all of these other Bigfoot-like creatures, and they all have their own individual characteristics. The Yeti of Tibet. I would be remiss not to mention the Yeti, which is probably the second most famous, the abominable snowman. So all these regions of the world have their hairy humanoids, and I think a lot of people don't really associate it with South America. So I wanted to talk about South American Bigfoot, hairy humanoids, if you will. And there's a long history there. The most famous hairy monster down in South America is probably the Mapinguari, and there's a lot of differing accounts of the Mapinguari. It's a weird creature from accounts. Uh, Typically, it can be like a Bigfoot type creature, just a hairy man. Other people think it's a giant sloth, like a prehistoric relic that has lived on and is now inhabiting South America. Other reports have it as a very almost paranormal being. It's got like one eye, so it sounds like a cyclops, and its mouth is either in its torso, so it'll open its mouth from its torso, or the mouth extends down to the torso. So it's just like this big one-eyed, mouth on two legs and two arms. So lots of weird, differing accounts of what the Mapinguari is. But the Andes Mountains also have their sort of version of a Yeti, a large, hairy ape-man. So we'll get into both of those tonight. And there's lots more like local legends in South America, much more niche, and they each have their own separate name. I'm not going to get into all of those in this episode. I really want to focus on the Andes Yeti and the Mapinguari because those are the two best known out of all of these and where the most reports come from, obviously. So let us get into some South American Bigfoot. All right, so I want to start first with the more Bigfoot like, the traditional Bigfoot or Yeti type creature in the Andes Mountains of Chile. And this comes to us from famous cryptozoologist Ivan T. Sanderson. Uh, and I'm on Cryptid Wiki here, and they call him Ivan Terrence Anderson. So they often get their stuff wrong. For a site as big as they are, they get things wrong all the time. But Ivan T. Sanderson, not Anderson, and he talked about a Yeti-like creature that allegedly roamed the Andes Mountains. And he was exploring this in his expeditions in the 1950s and 60s. And there's a couple of accounts here, and I'm going to read these to you guys. And again, take these with a little bit of a grain of salt because Cryptid Wiki is just notoriously bad. But again, Bigfoot sightings in North America, you're going to find tons of them everywhere. These more niche sightings are a little bit harder to find, but we'll talk about these here. So for the first one, there's a newspaper report from the 23rd of July, 1956. A local trucker, while driving in a desolate region of the area, happened to come across what looked to him like giant hairy man. He then stopped his truck, grabbed his shotgun, and began to chase the beast, which ran at a high speed uphill and disappeared into the rock sides of the mountain. He described the creature as being large, having hairy feet between 12 and 15 inches long. No other details were given, but right away, there's some things about this report that basically scream Bigfoot. And we hear this a lot in Bigfoot sightings, that it's a large, hairy creature with large feet, and it ran very quickly up a hill and disappeared into the mountains. So the large feet, the hair covered, he's thinking this is a man, a person. It's a beast, and it's running high speed uphill. And that's something that most animals can't do. A human being could not do it, especially if you're dressed in a gorilla suit or a Bigfoot costume. and then it just disappeared. And we hear this in a lot of Bigfoot sightings too, where it runs into the woods, or and then it's gone. And a lot of people attribute this to portals, and I don't. It's um, anyone who's seen a deer, anyone who's seen a bear, anyone who's seen any sort of wildlife. If you go camping with somebody, they walk 20 feet into the woods and you can't see them anymore. If I am camping with my buddy Josh and I say, hey, I'm going to go take a leak, and I walk 20 feet into the woods and he can't see me anymore, that doesn't mean I disappeared into a portal. I'm going to the bathroom, and just the trees and the cover and camouflage, all these things come into account with animals. So I'm not really a big believer in the portal theory. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I just think to say that because these things disappear, it's because of portals. I'm not buying that, because animals disappear. You see a deer, it runs into the woods and you lose sight of it. It's just gone. That's survival. But this does sound like a Bigfoot. Large feet, hairy, runs up a hill and then just disappears. So really interesting. I wish there was some more detail for this one. In a separate newspaper, a local person reported that a strange bone-chilling screams had been heard in the area of Nevado-Macon mountain range, close to a train station near Tolar Grande. The screams would begin when the sun went down, and footprints would be found in the surrounding areas of the station. The locals stated they seemed to be screams of like anger or pain. So this is another very typical, Bigfoot stereotype of the scream, the howl, and footsteps, bone-chilling screams. And that's what people hear. They hear these bone-chilling screams, these howls. It says it like rattles their chest. And most locals are going to understand what the local wildlife sounds like: coyotes and bear and moose and elk and whatever else. So again, just a nice little parallel to Bigfoot of these bone-chilling screams. I don't know what to make of that. The footprints, again, not a lot of detail here. I wish there were more, but there isn't. So let's go on to another one. And this says the most detailed report of an abominable snowman type creature from the Andes comes from a group of locals from a small village located in Rengo, Chile. The men of the 20 families living in the province of Rengo swore on their children's lives that a half man, half ape creature existed in the area. One of the men, a farmer by the name of Absalon Valencia, gave the statement that in December of 1957, so this is pre-Patterson Gimlin footage. So even if in America there was little whispers of Bigfoot-like creatures, down in South America, I don't think you're really going to be getting that. There's no internet. But he says a group of hunters and himself from Rengo came across a hairy animal, which one of the members of the hunting party noticed walking crouched along the rocks nearby. Scared, several of the men fired at the hairy animal, and to their surprise, the animal stood up. Again, we hear this a lot, and began to run like any bipedal creature. All of us became startled, stated Valencia. Seeing that strange being was running away, we noticed it was a type of man ape with a colossal height. The man ape had long arms and long dark hair which reached its waist and wore animal skins to cover its body. We all thought we were seeing things, or it was just a crazy local living in the mountains, but I can assure you, stated Valencia to the reporter, that the men and myself had never seen such a tall being. The being must have measured 2.5 meters, so 8 feet tall. So again, we hear a lot the same sort of thing. This hairy creature, it's crouching down. These guys go to shoot it, probably thinking it's just a bear or some other sort of animal, a boar. And then it stands up on 2 legs and runs away. So that's not a bear. The interesting thing here, covered in animal skins. So that makes me wonder, because again, is this just like an abnormally tall guy who may have had a career in the NBA if he had moved north, who's just in the woods being crazy, some crazy hermit or mentally ill person? I don't know. The animal skins, that sounds almost more caveman like than Bigfoot like. We don't really hear the animal skins thing too often, but it makes me wonder if it was maybe like a piebald, like different colors, like some lighter colors and then the darker colors. If you've seen a piebald deer, they just look really weird, almost albino, but not quite. And from a distance, it might look like it's got different skins on it. So I wonder if this was a Bigfoot. Was this just an oddly colored one? And the men who are chasing this thing just think that instead of it being a uniform color, as most animals are, like bears or, gorillas, did it just have different patterns in its hair? And they assumed this to be animal skins. Again, not a lot of detail here. But we're hearing that same sort of thing being repeated of they see this creature, they don't think Bigfoot, they're not thinking this is anything weird, and then it stands up on two legs and runs. A bear is not going to stand up on two legs and run. And if this were a man, you're talking about somebody who's 8 feet tall. So not only is it a wild man, which in and of itself is a weird phenomenon to have like a wild man in the woods. I mean, it happens, but that he's also 8 feet tall. Very, very, very strange. So wanted to highlight these because here you have these stories of what sounds very much like Bigfoot in the Andes Mountains pre Patterson Gimlin footage before the Bigfoot boom really hit. And I know the Yeti thing was kind of happening prior to the Patterson Gimlin footage, but still, this is a little village in South America. Did the legends of the Yeti and Bigfoot really reach these places back then? In that day and age, before the internet, before the information superhighway, before everybody had a cell phone, doubtful. So really, really interesting that they're seeing these things that are from the mid 50s that sound like Bigfoot sightings from today. Very, very strange. So now we'll get into the Mapinguari, which is another South American Bigfoot-like creature or cryptid or mythological creature. And this one really comes to us from Brazil. And it says here it's a mythical, monstrous, jungle-dwelling spirit from Brazilian folklore. They are said to protect the Amazon rainforest and its animals. According to folklore, when human beings grow too old, they can transform into this man-eating Mapinguari. They either have a gaping mouth, like I said earlier, or the stomach or a mouth split open from the throat to belly. So just this weird sort of torso mouth. And there's a picture here of a Mapinguari statue, and it's got the one eye, it's got the big mouth, it's got a mouth like near its navel. Other things say that the dense hair makes it bulletproof, which again, a lot of people talk about Bigfoot. They say they've shot Bigfoot and it seems to have no effect for the most part. I mean, some people claim to have killed Bigfoot, but most people say I've shot at these things and it doesn't seem to affect it. And a lot of people say maybe it's just the thick hair. The very dense hair is stopping the bullets. And I don't know about that. Maybe a 22 caliber. Maybe. I don't know about that. So it says Mapinguari is known to the Caratiana people as Kita Harara, meaning laughing beast, Kita Soemo, beast with the black face, or Owoj or Owojo, meaning maternal grandfather or mother's brother's son. So really interesting. So the Mapinguari in the Porous River basin of the Amazonas is described as a gigantic monkey, very hairy with donkey hooves or feet that are turned backwards. So that's an interesting detail, like backwards feet. Very strange. And here we are getting into more, it sounds more folklore and mythology than actual cryptid, actual animal. So they're seeing something. I'm just not sure what to make of that here. So to get more into the cryptozoology side, Bernard Heuvelmans, who's another famous cryptozoologist, he kind of worked along Ivan T. Sanderson, and other, people from that time era, John Green and all those guys. He speculated that the Mapinguari might be an unknown primate akin to Bigfoot. So we have that. We have other people suggesting that it might be a giant ground sloth. And we'll get into some other stories there that suggest that. So again, if you're talking undiscovered ape or a ground sloth that just kind of, didn't go extinct and exists now into modern times, that's probably the more likely scenario, but who knows? But a lot of these animals, another quality they share with Bigfoot, the South American Bigfoot, is the stench. A lot of people talk about this overwhelming stench of death, of garbage, of decay. So we hear that a lot too in Bigfoot. We hear this a lot in the Mapinguari and other ape-men of South America. So just very, very interesting. So I'm going to recount some sightings of the Mapinguari, and this is coming from Cryptid Archives. I'm hoping their information is a little better than Cryptid Wiki. Ivan T. Anderson, I love that. So we're going to go through these, and a lot of these don't have a ton of detail, but they go back to prior to 1913. The first one I'm going to talk about here is undated, and this one comes to us from Jaroslav Marez. And he received a description of the Mapinguari from the region's Waika Indians. And this one says that this witness So he says that he came face to face with an unearthly beast. He was convinced it was the Mapinguari, which had entered his remote cabin at night. It was so large that when it stood upright, roaring at him, it lifted the wooden ceiling. Apparently, the creature knocked the man to the ground with one powerful lunge of its arm, breaking his jaw. He believes he was only able to save himself, having had a gun which he used to fire around directly into the shaggy haired monster that fled, leaving a trail of blood. So there's not a lot of detail here. It's a large creature. So this could have been a giant sloth. It could have been a bear. It could have been any number of things. Um, but it dates back to, we don't have a date to this one. So this next story comes to us from 1930. It's from an explorer named Inocencio, who was exploring the Urubu River with a number of his friends. He became lost in pursuit of a troop of black monkeys, which he intended to shoot. He was hunting. He became separated from his friends, as I said, and was spending the night in a tree when he was disturbed by what sounded like a man crying out 3 times. So again, we have the howling. He's thinking it's a man. It sounds human-ish. He's thinking it's a man. And again, you have an explorer, someone who's used to being in the woods, in the forests, hearing something he can't explain. So he says, some 40 yards away was a small clearing where a Samamaria had fallen, I guess the type of tree, and its branches had brought down other smaller trees. This is where his last cry had come from. Immediately afterwards, there was a loud noise of footsteps, as if a large animal was coming at me at top speed. We've heard this before, too. A couple episodes ago, I had a deer hunter who, in my listener stories episode, he was up in a tree and something rushed the tree, and it was dark. He couldn't see it, but he said it was a large animal and ran at him like very quickly. He continues, when it reached the fallen tree, it gave a grunt and stopped. Finally, a silhouette the size of a man of middle height appeared in the clearing. So middle height, maybe 5.5 feet tall, just not super tall guy, but average height, middle height. It remained where it stood, looking perhaps suspiciously at the place where I was. Then it roared again as before. I could wait no longer and fired without even troubling to take proper aim. There was a savage roar and then a noise of crashing bushes. I was alarmed to see the animal rush, growling, towards me, and I fired a second bullet. The terrifying creature was hit and gave an incredibly swift leap and hid near the old Samamera. From behind this barricade, it gave threatening growls so fiercely that the tree to which I was clinging seemed to shake. I had previously been on a jaguar hunt and taken an active part in them, multiple hunts, and I know how savage this cat is when it's run down and at bay. But the roars of this animal that attacked me that night were more terrible and deafening than a jaguar's. I loaded my gun again and, fearing another attack, fired in the direction of the roaring. The black shape roared again, more loudly, but retreated and disappeared into the depths of the forest. From time to time, I could still hear its growl of pain until at last it ceased. Dawn was just breaking. So very similar to that story in my listener episode, where a listener had written in and said he was hunting deer and this large creature, he couldn't really see it, rushed his location. He didn't shoot at it, but this person is shooting at it. Very strange. And this tale continues. After spending the night in the tree, the next morning, Inocencio discovered broken shrubs, splashes of blood, and a strong, sour smell permeating the whole area. So again, you have the smell. I'm not saying this was Bigfoot or this was a Mapinguari. It sure doesn't sound like a giant sloth. Sloths are not known to be aggressive, and maybe a prehistoric one was, I don't know, but modern day sloths are not known to growl and roar and rush people like this. This just sounds like a very aggressive animal. It's enough where this guy was shooting at it. But again, very similar behaviors to other Bigfoot stories we've heard. So I think this is an interesting account. 1937, a 1937 report from central Brazil claimed that a Mapinguari had gone on a 3-week rampage, killing over 100 cows and ripping out the tongues from their carcasses. Another weird one. We hear about this with Bigfoot going into farms and killing the livestock and cows and horses. And I don't know what to make of that. It could be any number of things, but the people there are saying it's a Mapinguari. So this next one is from 1981. A Brazilian man, Teofilo, and his daughter, Lydia, living in Valeria, recounted to Pat Spain that in September 1981, Lydia was at the edge of the forest near her house at night when she was startled by a howling noise. Again, she fled to her father, who grabbed a gun and went to untie his cow. He saw an animal outside, which he identified as the Mapinguari, and shot at it before fleeing back to his house. The next day, all the villagers moved and settled by the edge of the river. Another eyewitness named João Batista Azevedo claimed to have seen a Mapinguari in 1981 following a 45-day canoe trip from the nearest village. And he says, I was working by the river when I heard a scream, a horrible scream. Suddenly, something looking like a man came out of the forest, all covered in hair. He was walking on two legs, and thank God he did not come toward us. I will always remember that day. So again, bipedal, covered in hair. Could this have been a person? Again, with Bigfoot stories, I can almost believe some of them could be hoaxes. Some of them could be people in gorilla costumes or Bigfoot suit that they found on Amazon. I don't think, in the middle of the rainforest, this guy's on a 45-day canoe trip. He's in deep in Brazil. Um, I don't think he's encountering, and this is 1981 too. I don't think there's going to be hoaxers down there. Just very strange. So in 2004, a Caratiana man named Giovaldo claimed to have encountered a Mapinguari in 2003, 2004, 2005 near an area called the Cave of the Mapinguari, although he gives conflicting accounts of the sighting. In the first report, he simply said he had seen it and been knocked unconscious by the smell. He says, it was coming toward the village and was making a big noise. It stopped when it got near me, and that's when the bad smell made me dizzy and tired. I fainted, and when I came to, it was gone. Interesting. The account was confirmed by his father, Lucas, who said that when his son took him back to the site of the encounter, he saw a cleared pathway where the creature had departed, as if a boulder had rolled through and knocked down all the trees and vines. So again, we hear this sometimes in Bigfoot reports when it, leaves the area, there's a path of destruction, a clear path where it sort of brushed down where it walked out. So clearly something large, even if it's not Bigfoot, something large. They're not, mistaking a deer or a person. So interesting. In 2014, a group of berry pickers in Brazil's Sumama Forest Reserve, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing these things, on the Japim River, reported seeing a cyclopean manguari in September of 2014. Whilst in a remote area of the forest, 5 hours away from the nearest village, the harvesters heard a cry. The witness says, I began to imitate the cry, which we hear a lot in Bigfoot sightings. People will howl, they hear a hoot or a whoop, and they do it back. And I realized that the sound was coming to us. That was when we started to hear a loud and intermittent crash. At that moment, a creature of dark color appeared and about 2 meters high with only one reddish eye like flames. So a one-eyed, tall creature. Not sure what to make of that. The men fled back to the river and spent the night in their tent, but the creature appeared again, and they returned to their village in the canoe during the night, abandoning their equipment. Some of the men could not sleep for days, and as of October 2014, none of the people in the village had dared to return to the forest. Not sure what to make of these. They sound very Bigfoot in nature, but a lot of these accounts are not specifically stating what they saw. Something big, 2 meters tall. So you're talking, most of these accounts like 6 feet to 8 feet tall, dark. This one is talking about a red eye. And you have to start wondering, where does the legend end and the real account begin? Maybe it had 2 eyes and this person only saw one because they're thinking Mapinguari. Maybe it was the angle of the creature. They only saw the one eye. I don't know. But we're hearing a lot of just very similar tropes here that we hear in Bigfoot encounters. The cries, the howls, the ungodly sounds that these things are making, the crashing through the brush. Is the Mapinguari probably a ground sloth? I would have to say so. But at the same time, a lot of these accounts, they don't sound like sloth-like behavior, crashing through the brush, rushing to somebody. Running at somebody. The roar, the really loud roar. I don't know. That doesn't sound sloth-like to me. So who knows? But some interesting stories in here from through the ages. And I skipped a lot of them. There's some in here that just don't have many details, or they're clearly more ground sloths. I don't know. So interesting. So one last story. This is another one that's undated. A Mapinguari was said to have been killed by gold miners in Rondonia, a 2-day walk from Porto Viejo. Another gold prospector claimed to have shot a giant monkey covered in reddish fur, which charged at him in the forest. He shot it in the face and then fainted, and when he came to, the animal had been gone. When Oren, the investigator, investigated the area, he found a pool of blood and round paw prints with marks of clawed toes pointing inwards. So it kind of sounds like a sloth, but this guy's seeing a giant monkey. And I don't know if people would mistake a sloth for a monkey. I think it would be much more likely to mistake it for a bear. They look more bear-like. They have more of a snout and the claws. Uh, but this one just reminded me of the siege at Ape Canyon. Same thing. You had gold miners and the giant monkeys, these creatures that were attacking the gold miners. So make of these what you will. I don't know. Is this a Bigfoot-like creature? Is this a totally different cryptid? I mean, if it's a giant sloth, that's a cryptid. That's, still interesting, even though it's not technically Bigfoot. But we are hearing these very Bigfoot-like characteristics to these stories with the howls and the crashing and the smell, the standing up on and running on two legs. I think sloths can stand up, but they're not going to run away on two legs. They're going to go back down on all fours. No animals are bipedal except us. So really interesting. All right, so the last story I could find, and this is coming from Reddit by user NoCup4381 on the subreddit Cryptozoology. And he talks about seeing a Mapinguari. I'm going to go through this story. He says, so this happened around the end of May 2016. I'm from Guyana, especially Georgetown, specifically Georgetown, sorry. But we came to the U.S. when I was pretty young, and I grew up in New York City. This is to preface the fact that I do not have much experience with wild animals at all. I'm a huge dog lover, though. Shout out to all my fellow dog parents out there. My grandpa is a native belonging to the Amerindian Arawak tribe. He grew up hunting and foraging in the East Berbice quarantine area of the Apira Amerindian Reservation. Again, I'm sorry if I'm butchering these names. He's extremely knowledgeable on the flora and fauna of that region because he is a conservation ranger / guide and a GDF vet. He's basically an expert on the Amazon interior as a whole. Now, growing up, we would do an annual trip back home to see him and some of our other family members every summer. He would get on his old speedboat and travel up the Rupununi River to stay with us for a week in Georgetown. He would constantly tell me tales about the crazy things he'd seen in the interior: mermaids, river dolphins, shape-shifting, witches, dragons, you get the gist. One that always stood out to me was the Mapinguari legend, because he was always talking about how he had seen them multiple times. He would even argue with our family friends who believed that the original description of the Mapinguari as a Bigfoot-like creature, but my grandpa was adamant that he'd seen it and it resembled a tall bear. So right there, as I said, tall bear. That sounds more like a sloth. So let's get into this. A week into the trip, I went to the reservation with him, as he had promised to take me on one of his tours, and then we'd camp out at the outpost station at the end of the village. Keep in mind that I was already sick from this trip from food poisoning and the boat ride to the reservation, so even though I was excited, I was equally exhausted. Once we gathered his tour group of expat city goers, we ventured into the bush on the eastern side of the village. The tour went great. We spotted some black caiman near the riverbank, tropical birds, and found jaguar scat. Strangely, towards the end of the tour, we found what I can only describe as a huge mound of dirt and red clay that formed what looked like a cave. The tourist asked my grandpa about it, and he danced around the question and made some joke about the Amazon having a mind of its own. So, tree structures, mud caves, who knows? He whispered to me that we'd come back to the spot later that night since it was close to the village outpost. It was close to nightfall once we got the group back to the village, and my grandpa gathered our gear to stay at the outpost. He seemed all too excited to head back to that mound from earlier, and once we got our torchlights and pack gear ready, we set out to find it. Now, I was a 15-year-old kid that was already tired from all the events of the day, combined with my healthy fear of the dark jungle, making me an anxious mess. I always felt safe with my grandpa because he did this every day, giving me enough confidence to pull through. The first thing I noticed upon coming to that mound again was the smell. It was extremely musty, like stinky mildew from wet laundry, but 10 times worse. Then we heard it. Something was scraping a tree to our left. We got our torchlights on, and I immediately froze. About 20 yards away, in the tree line, was a set of what looked like huge bear paws around a tree about 10 feet up. The claws on this thing were massive. Then, as if the thing wanted me to pass out, it reared its head from around the tree. We both had our lights on it, and I can only explain it was a mix between a grizzly bear and a beaver. Just a massive, shaggy, blocky head with buck teeth. I had more than enough at this point and turned around to see my grandpa laughing with his hand on my shoulder, saying, "I tell you, the thing looked like a bear." We backed out and walked away, We went to the outpost, a 25-minute walk from where we saw the animal, where he attempted to calm me down by poking fun at my reaction and saying that he saw the specific Mapinguari setting up its home near the village and has been keeping an eye on it for the last couple of weeks. My grandpa is retired now and in the States with us, but I'll never forget that experience. I've told some friends who are into cryptozoology, and they referred me here, saying that there's been other accounts of this thing. Sorry for all the useless details. It's my first time posting. So this definitely sounds like a ground sloth. And if we go further down into his account here, I'm not going to read the whole thing because he responds to a lot of comments, but there's this chart here of ground sloths. And he says the thing he saw, the individual that I encountered was huge. I am 5'10", and this thing had to be nearly double my height. So almost 12 feet, 11 to 12 feet. It was in the stance of image B and looks very similar. So I'm going to blow this up here for you guys. This is the image of the ground sloth, and he's saying it looked like this image here, B. So, and as you can see, I mean, when this thing's on all fours, it looks more like a bear than an ape. Even standing up, it looks like a bear. It's got a longer protruding snout. It's got long claws, not hands. I don't see how anybody can mistake this for a monkey. It looks like a bear. It looks like a sloth, but it does not look like a monkey. So I'm going to say that this last guy saw a giant ground sloth, which is still very cool, even though it's not Bigfoot. But I'm going to say that's what it was. All right, everybody. So there's just a brief overview of Bigfoot in South America. I don't know if there's a ton of these sightings. Again, the ones that Ivan T. Sanderson was talking about early on in the Andes of Chile, that sounds more to me like traditional Bigfoot or Yeti, abominable snowman, hairy ape-like person, humanoid, bipedal. These other stories, they can kind of go either way. They do have Bigfoot characteristics, but I think a lot of them are probably giant ground sloths. So not all of them. I mean, the ones with the roaring and the rushing of the hunter, that sounds weird to me. But overall, I think these are probably ground sloths. So what do you guys think? Does Bigfoot roam South America as well as North America? Are these just giant ground sloths? Are these another cryptid altogether? So let me know what you guys think. If you have local legends, if you've seen Bigfoot or ghosts or anything you want me to know, shoot me an email, jason@oddanduntold.com. I'm happy to speak to you, have you on the show, read your story on the show. I just love hearing of weird stories and all that good stuff. So until next time, everybody, question everything. Is the Mapinguari really Bigfoot? Is this more of local folklore mixed with a giant sloth? I mean, I'm just not buying the Cyclops thing and the mouth that opens in the chest. I mean, that just sounds more like folklore and not like cryptozoology. It doesn't sound like a natural known animal that fits in with our known animal kingdom as Bigfoot would. Bigfoot would fit into our animal kingdom much more than a Cyclops with a mouth in its belly. So question everything. I think these are giant ground sloths, but I do think there's something to those earlier stories. Embrace the weird, everybody. And until next time, rock and roll.